I don't think that a God would really care so much about truth as much as God would care about human beings, right? And I don't think that truth always gives well-being. I posted a video a while ago about like the dying grandma hypothesis, right? It's imagine you go into a room with your grandmother, she's about to pass away, and your brother says to grandma, "Grandma, you're gonna die," right? And it's like, well, it's true. What what value does that bring? Why would you even mention it? There's no like if the pursuit of truth is just valuable in itself, then you should say that. Almost everyone, even theology people, even hardcore philosophers would agree you probably shouldn't say that because the pursuit of truth is not always valuable. So I think that truth is instrumentally valuable towards some ends, but not in all ends, right? I think that there are times where
Yeah.
even not truth is, falsehood can be valuable. And that's kind of where I've been kind of doing a lot of my work recently, where
Yeah.
people tend to disagree with me a lot, and I tend not to care.
Austin, what's up, brother?
How you doing, man?
Dude, I'm glad to have you on the podcast, man. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I know from my own personal journey, the philosophical pursuit can be very introspective. It can be a very it can be almost psychedelic in a lot of ways. Really like just changing paradigms and really pushing you into these existential places. What made you want to do this online in a public space? Like, why bring it into a community of projection or a community of people that are, I mean, Instagram and YouTube have their own algorithms, and so you'll get a different type of engagement for each one of those. But what made you want to engage with these platforms specifically and bring it into that space?
Um, I mean, you see a lot of people online who are, posting their videos, their Christian apologetics, and even atheist apologetics. And I realized that not many people were philosophically trained and kind of just throwing stuff out that they've heard from the new atheism movement and maybe from like the Connectleys. And I was like, I can fill a gap here where I can bridge this understanding between the atheist and the theist, rather than like hating each other or thinking that that the opposition or even understanding them to be opposition is stupid in some way. And through my studies, I've learned that both sides have very reasonable and very well thought out arguments that go back hundreds and thousands of years. And it's much more nuanced than people on social media uh, think it to be. And so I wanted to start posting to bridge that gap that was very, I think, open. And in that, I also just wanted to start having conversations with people around the world. I'm from a small town. There's not many people. My college is very small, and so the conversations I would have aren't the conversations that I really wanted
Mm,
to be having. And so
yeah, I
posting
relate to
online,
you on this.
yes, now I get to talk with Dan McClellan, Britt Hartley, Nolan Gertz, like people from other parts of the world, even like James Tartaglia in the UK. I can have conversations with people everywhere. That's a good for me. That's one of the highest goods is to be able to have the conversation about philosophy, and so that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Now I'm curious on a personal note. I notice how, I mean, I know for me personally, I can start to feel the algorithm or the things that I know does well and doesn't do well. And
Mhm.
I am very conscious of that. Is that something that you think about when you post, or are you pretty much like set on this is what I want to say, this is how I want to say it? Um, and I don't really care about what I think is going to perform well or uh, hit the metrics in a particular way.
Yeah. So it's a good question. When I was younger, I started two companies, and I ended up selling one of them, and I'm still working in another. But so I just kind of took that business knowledge that I had, and I was like, I really like philosophy. I'm just going to apply my business knowledge to the social media algorithm with philosophy and see how it works. And so I started with book stuff, recommending books, and it did really well. Then I slowly started to post my philosophical thoughts, realized those did really well, and then I started to combine them. And now I'm really more so just doing philosophy stuff. But I did it in that way to get a foundational support system for people who are already interested in philosophy, and now I can then go and just talk about what I want to talk about in the way that I want to talk about it. And now that I have that foundation, I'm branching out to other people, and so it's kind of worked in a very business model, kind of way. But now I don't really I consider the algorithm, of course, right? Like I don't post like 5-minute videos, so I try to keep them
Yeah.
short, but I won't let the algorithm kind of dictate what I say or like post content that only does well. Like I don't care about that at all.
Yeah. And what's your philosophy on the engagement of like when you like, cuz I'm curious as to whether or not you think social media is helping people confront reality, or if it's helping them kind of perform, or if it's helping them perform this identity that helps them avoid these philosophical things, meaning they already kind of latch on to what they think they believe, and the algorithms just kind of feed that and support it, or if it actually does open those portals up for people.
I wouldn't use the word confront reality for philosophical reasons, of course.
Sure.
But definitely I would say that social media allows people access to conversations that were only being had in like very elite groups just back in the 1900s, 1800s. Now everyone can be part of them. All they have to do is be willing to find it. Or maybe just stumbles upon your algorithm and now you're interested. You get to have conversations with people across the world to get different perspectives, different religions. Um, which I think it's incredible. It's absolutely amazing that we get to hear people from different parts of the world, which if you think back to, even early 2000s, like, people weren't having conversations with people across the world, just, like, in their daily lives and comment sections, and I think that that's really interesting, and we're in the early stages of that, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the next, like, even 20, 30 years, and I think that Alex O'Connor recently said in a podcast that the meaning crisis may be because of that. That we can look on social media and find people that are happy who are in a different part of the world and they're having like, their own religious experience that works for them. And so if their religion works for them and it does really well, it's clearly mine's not the only one that, that takes care of people. And that may be
Yeah.
true in the way that is pragmatically true. And I think that's super interesting. And I want to see how that plays out too.
It does seem to have a polarity effect or a binary effect that also comes along with that. Like anything else, it's like there's this tremendous good, and then there's this tremendous dark side that I find comes with the internet that will allow people to go further down certain types of algorithmic rabbit holes, or connecting with certain groups that might support insular thinking, or just confirm a paradigm in which they've already adopted.
Yeah.
And I oftentimes think it's like when I'm having conversations with people, am I having a conversation with this person, or am I having a conversation with their algorithm? The
Mhm.
stuff that they're receiving. And that's why I'm not sure, when I start talking about nuance. And it's interesting, philosophy kind of sits in this space as well, because I think the balance of the opposites, or this binary of not every situation is as simple as we want to make it out to be online.
Mhm.
And I think trying to communicate that online seems to be a much slower pace, as opposed to if you want to find your hotbed of people that are ready to buy into and support whatever uh, you know, ideological or ideological stance that you're taking, and just feeding into that. I noticed that I personally noticed that a lot, um, online. But that's why I want to talk to people like you, because it's like there are people I think that are interested in kind of using these platforms and reaching in a different way, as
Yeah.
opposed to the polemical, uh, which doesn't seem very interesting to me. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but
No, I agree. I mean, if you look into my comment sections, you're gonna find people pissed at me pretty frequently, because I don't just do the new atheism, attacking religion, attacking God, and I'm not just going to defend theism, dogmatically either. I'm very much in the
Mhm.
position. Like I said before we started recording, I am violently agnostic. I still use the word atheist, though I don't think that it describes what I really am. I just use it because it's easier. Just kind of end the conversation when I'm having a conversation with someone. I don't really want to get into it. Um, rather than have to sit there and explain my philosophical ideas over, 30. 40 minutes in a daily conversation. um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, you'll find in my comment section people, atheists attacking me for defending atheism in a way that they don't like, and I do the same thing for religious ideals. I'm just interested in what we can say with true honesty, not having dogma in the way. I am just interested in clearing the water to have an honest conversation. That's my main goal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I have people in my comments as well. Well, I'll have one guy or one person will say like, "Oh, are you Greek Orthodox?" And then the other person a Protestant will be like, "You're the devil." And it's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
it's really funny because it's like you're missing the context of like your own religion. It's like
Mhm,
people and so it is hilarious, but I think that's a good segue into what we were kind of like texting about a little bit before this podcast. We are talking about this idea of labels and atheism
mhm,
versus theism. And one of the things I mentioned was I said it's interesting to me how these some certain conversations tend to transcend these labels and these paradigms of how people have traditionally argued. Talk about the new atheist movement and whatnot. And then you said something. You said, "Well, it's not really about transcending, but it's about understanding the historical context." So I want to dig into that and kind of explore this topic as well as you know your position there.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about like the historical context, which is where I kind of spend most of my time,
Or
trying to
more so what you
understand.
meant by the statement, or more so like where what you were thinking when we were responding to the transcendence of something versus the historical context. So I'm yeah, just curious as to what you were thinking there when you were,
Yeah, I
either
mean,
pushing against transcendence or there was something there that you were responding to.
I'm not really interested in like, I mean, I don't argue against transcendence, right? Because my whole thing is I don't know, right? And I don't think that the
Mm,
arguments that we have currently dismantle transcendence at all. Consciousness is a huge problem for atheists, right? And we don't have that solved. And as long as that's open, I think the atheists have a problem that they have to deal with. And Daniel Dennett tried to solve it, saying that consciousness doesn't even exist. Pretty sure Sam Harris did some work like that as well. And people aren't really convinced by that at all. And so my whole thing is I don't argue against it. I don't think that I can, and I don't think that it's really beneficial to continue making at least that same argument, because there are other ones that are very interesting and compelling. And that if you're just honest as an atheist, as someone who just doesn't believe in God, you should be able to say consciousness is a huge problem, and then go, I still don't believe. But if you just go, I don't believe, and therefore consciousness doesn't exist, like starting with the conclusion, going to the premise, it just shows dogma. And so I'm not interested in that. I'm really interested in trying to understand how people have used the word God, how people have thought of transcendence across cultures, not just in the West, but across cultures, and try to unify them in a way that is purely human so that we can understand each other. And if we can understand each other, maybe we can start solving these problems. But if we're not honest, we don't try to understand each other, we are not going to get anywhere at all. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, is just honest communication and acknowledging that transcendence is an issue, right? Like we don't have that solved. Um, and it doesn't mean that like one side wins over the other. What it means is that we don't know. That's what I really try to get people to understand, is that we just don't know.
yeah. Well, it's only a problem if from a propositional like when you're trying it's really only a problem in the West, honestly, but it's only a problem
I
if you're
mean,
trying to use it to win some type of propositional argument or solve some type of propositional riddle. But I think that falls under Vervaeke's work with how he addresses the meaning. John Vervaeke, when he talks about this propositional tyranny that we're under, and like being stuck within a propositional argument to try to prove theism over atheism. I think you're right, is very silly on both sides because it is fundamentally missing and avoiding ways that we interact in the world. Ways that we are just that we be. That we enact, that we engage, that we embody, we participate. And I think consciousness, while you're right, I think science is not going to at least currently, is not giving us any hard evidence, of any determining factor towards where consciousness is located,
Mhm.
towards what it actually is doing, what it means for our theological frameworks, our philosophical frameworks, all of that. However, I do think uh, that there are a lot of people that are engaging with consciousness all the time. All of us. I mean,
Mhm.
like we don't avoid it, and I think at a certain point, that type of awareness and that type of I look at it as just recentering, like recentering what it is we're trying to do. And what I've noticed, like the work that I do a lot with like I guess deconstruction is trying to move the focus off the proposition and understanding that embodied perspective towards these topics. That doesn't mean dismissing it. It doesn't mean saying it's not a huge pillar of how we construct the experience that we're seeing or how we make sense of the experiences that we're seeing. But it
Mhm.
does mean that we shouldn't center it. So what I noticed within, like, let's say Christianity, much of the modern day Protestant Western evangelical culture is very much centered on a propositional forward way of engaging. And I think
Mhm.
that's what so many atheists are pushing back because they're like, that's ridiculous. So if you start really unpacking stuff, there's so many holes in that. But I like what you're saying. And I think I, I personally feel this too. Materialism and reductionism doesn't get to avoid this problem. Like,
Mhm.
they don't have a seat from nowhere, meaning, you know what I mean? Like, they can't sit back and say, well, we've solved it because we know that your problems are wrong. And we
Mhm.
know that we've objectively figured all this other stuff out because they're swimming in the same pool. And I think that's where I'm always pushing like I'm always interested when these conversations can move into that space, like you're saying, where both sides can kind of be honest with like, yeah, mystery might not mean a puzzle to be solved. Mystery might mean the thing which will not be solved.
Yeah.
Like beyond, I love what Kusa talks about. The learned ignorance, where it's like there's the point in which the intellect will no longer afford us those types of experiences.
Mhm.
I mean, the school that I come from is probably like more the mystical school, but that's not to be put in a thing of like, "Oh, let me debate it." That's a way of being. That's just a
Yeah,
mode
yeah.
of being,
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I mean, recently I've been doing a lot of thinking about, the value of philosophy itself. Um,
mm,
as philosophy as itself is just like it's a propositional pursuit, and I would
well,
say I
ca
would say in a lot of ways, philosophy is a
yeah,
propositional pursuit, at least in the West, I would say.
In the
Yeah,
West, I'll agree with you in
yeah,
the West. Yeah,
yeah. Um, and
modern
I've been
times.
increasingly more interested in just experiencing and being, and that perhaps propositions don't really need to be pursued at all. When we talk about truth, like the value of truth goes back to Plato and Aristotle, even the pre-Socratics, and philosophers have just adopted, the value of truth. And Nietzsche comes along. It's like, well, why not untruth? Which I think it's one of like the most provocative things that a philosopher has ever said in the West up until that time period. And the pragmatists kind of just took it and ran with it. But I've been really interested in this idea, like devaluing the value of truth, and that if truth is contingent
Mm.
upon propositions, propositions are contingent upon language, language is contingent upon human beings. If human beings don't engage with these propositions, we aren't really engaging in a truth. But if we are just experiencing, it seems as though truth gets collapsed in a way. It's not a good way to put it, but it's I think that the experience of life itself, I've been so
Truth
much
gets
more interested
yeah,
in. Yeah,
truth gets flattened. I think
yeah,
flattened. It like it gets truncated and condensed into uh, it's rigid.
uh
I would say it becomes rigid, and I think that's where a lot of our I mean, a lot of the issues we're having in society, I think, comes from that debate of truth. So
yeah,
it's interesting.
yeah. I mean, like I've been really interested in world making recently too, and this idea that truth is somewhere like out there in the world. The pragmatists just like completely disagreed, right? They, especially Richard Rorty, really grabbed at the idea that truth was contingent upon language, and that people build the world in different ways and use different symbols to orient the world. So they construct metaphysical frameworks that are contradictory with one another. But if the language or if the truth comes from the language and the symbols are different, we're gonna have different truths. And that is so fascinating with how we engage in the
Mm.
world, especially philosophically. Because we it's a implicit proposition or premise that we all experience the world in the same way, that we all have the same metaphysical framework, and that's just not true itself. So I've been really interested in kind of um, evaluating what it would mean to just experience without caring about truth in a way. I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I always go back to Plato when I think about truth, the
Mhm.
pursuit of the good, the true, and the beautiful. And I always like what Plato writes about with this with I can't remember which book it was in. Was it Alcibiades or the Phaedra? I can't remember. Um, Talking about truth being revealed in the sense of or remembered, and this
Yeah,
idea
yeah, yeah.
of things. And so I've always looked at it in this the good, the true, and the beautiful, and it's like this the order of that too. It's like knowing what's good, knowing what's true, knowing what's beautiful. And I do think that I'm not set on what truth is. I think that's a hard question because yes, you're right. Like as these forms as these forms begin to play out, and we won't even go into the forms because that's a whole other thing to unwind. But
Mm,
I don't want and I don't want you to. I mean, I want to be careful when I say that. Uh, Anyway, the beauty,
mhm.
at the top of that. I've always been interested in that because I think we lose beauty in the pursuit of truth. When we stop at the
Sure.
pursuit of truth, we lose the beauty. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of Western culture has fallen into that trap of being fixated on this idea of truth and forgetting about the pursuit of the beauty.
Yeah.
And you don't need philosophical arguments to experience beauty.
Mhm.
Um, from the qualia, from the personal, from the objective or the subjective standpoint, or even the transjective in many ways. It's like that beauty is something that is, to me, it's pretty powerful. But what I'm interested in too with this is when we think about this, you talk about these distributions of truth in different contextual places, and these arguments about truth or these arguments about propositions. What oftentimes I think about these arguments as revealing more about the subjective experience and that person's orientation towards beauty,
Mhm.
and the person making them. Like when I hear somebody talking, I'm less interested in, um, I'm less interested in the propositional claim that they're making, and really like wrestling with the empiricism of the empirical, there's just so many things that it's like, okay, at the end of the day, what are we gonna do with it? Like,
Yeah.
but I'm more interested in what is this revealing about the contextualized experience of that person making that statement? What
Mm.
is that revealing about the psyche, where it's oriented, where it's fixated, where it's complex, where the complex has organized itself around the need for stability for that truth, the need
Mhm.
for some type of identification towards that. I think that that's something that I think I wish we would start more people would be looking at. I don't think many of the people that I engage with in the comment sections are I make this joke of like, does this person have a face or not? And it's not a pejorative, not in a demeaning way, but and when I say that I mean like there's a book by C.S. Lewis where she's arguing with the gods, but she's telling her constructed story of what she thinks about the gods, and then the gods
Mm.
look at her and they don't say anything, and they look down, and she has a different book in her hand that they replaced it with. She doesn't even notice this raggedy, crumpled book that was like way less eloquent, way less put together, way less factually constructed. It was just a very raw, honest bones story of who she was. And she started
Mm.
reading it and she was almost embarrassed. And she was like, you know, this is my anger. This is my frustration. This is what I am really. And that's always sat with me because it's like, I find that a lot of people, when they're making these propositional arguments, they're not arguing from a bare bones place. They're arguing from a constructed story that they're telling. And conversations are not interesting until a person has a face, until we can like
Mm.
peel back the layers. And so when you said that about philosophy, my imagination of philosophy, of what I would hope that it could be, is something that allows a person to pull back the layers of bullshit within themselves.
Mhm.
You know? I don't know. What do you think? What would you add to that?
Yeah, no. I think that's well, one, that I think that's what Socrates is doing in ancient
Yeah,
Greece.
you're getting
He
Socratized. Yeah.
yeah, it seems as though he's trying to, peel back, I guess, as in your words, peel back the bullshit. The unexamined life is not worth living. Now, of course, this does place because it's in the words of Plato, there is a value of truth here. But I think that we can look at Socrates in a way that within this context of um, peeling back the individual for who they truly are, right? I think that there's something really interesting there. And if you want to, kind of pull in William James too, and I think it's in the will to believe. Don't quote
Yeah.
me on that, but I think
Mhm.
it's the will to believe. He's basically saying in one part that we don't have a moral responsibility to truth or to reason. We do have a moral responsibility to sentient beings, right? And I think
Mm.
that philosophy, I've noticed, doesn't engage with the human being anymore. It really is. The king is truth. The king is reason, and I'm not all that
Same
interested
with
in that.
same with theology, right? I see
Mhm,
I look at there's the theology bros and the philosophy bros. I mean, you get people that it's an identity marker of,
mhm,
and it's not just the bros. I mean, I think theology probably has uh, or modern day evangelicalism has a more complete cosmology. I mean, it has a cosmology. I don't think
mhm,
philosophy has. There's nothing to center on.
mhm.
Um, And so it allows you to be more so centered on, do you believe the correct thing or not? Or are you
Yeah.
in or not?
Well, I mean, especially in the West, given Christianity's history of Greek philosophy and its influence, like the Gospel of John, that's a that is Greek philosophy at its finest, And
Yeah.
so, yeah, we have
Mhm.
to kind of contextualize Christianity within its cultural, context. And given that it is so embedded in Greek philosophical ideals, yeah, you're going to get this value of truth. You're going to get, do you worship the correct God? Like, okay, that's Greek. That is a very Greek ideal, and which you're not going to see in all religions. And
Mm.
like I said, I tend to think that one, if there's a God, I don't think that God would um, quite care if we got the correct God. There's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not just gonna like throw that claim out there, and I'm also not gonna make an argument for it because it would take a while. But I don't think that God would really care. I don't think that a God would really care so much about truth as much as God would care about human beings, right? And I don't think that truth always gives well-being. I posted a video a while ago about like the dying grandma hypothesis, right? It's imagine you go into a room with your grandmother, she's about to pass away, and your brother says to grandma, "Grandma, you're gonna die," right? And it's like, well, it's true. What what value does that bring? Why would you even mention it? There's no like if the pursuit of truth is just valuable in itself, then you should say that. Almost everyone, even theology people, even hardcore philosophers would agree you probably shouldn't say that because the pursuit of truth is not always valuable. So I think that truth is instrumentally valuable towards some ends, but not in all ends, right? I think that there are times where
Yeah.
even not truth is, falsehood can be valuable. And that's kind of where I've been kind of doing a lot of my work recently where
Yeah.
people tend to disagree with me a lot, and I tend not to care.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's I relate to that a lot because I have a background in evangelical Christianity. I came out of that world where I was working in a nonprofit that was connected to a church, and I have a degree in modern dance too. So I was always a little bit
Mm,
like free floaty artist type, but I wound up getting connected to a church and didn't experience a lot of trauma like growing up as a child, although I probably did a little bit in that sector, but I also experienced a lot of just like very weird stuff when I was working there that I walked away from. And it took me a while to kind of like reorient myself of like, okay, where am I going to actually land with this? And now I'm in a really interesting spot. But as far as like what I say or how I make a propositional claim towards my relationship, I'm not I'm not so much like as vague and confusing as Peterson is about it. But at the end of the day, if somebody's like, well, "What do you believe in?" I'm like, I don't care. I don't care about the. I know how I engage phenomenologically with the death, burial, and resurrection, like, or not death, burial, and resurrection, but the death and resurrection, as opposed to this idea of a literal belief in the death, burial, and resurrection. Like those two things,
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, my argument is always this: like, you could make a claim based on whatever facts that you're looking at to say, I believe this happened. That's fine. But at the end of the day, no one has any claim. That's not a proposition we even have access to. All we have access to is a phenomenological experience as to how we engage with the story, with the mythic imagination, with the symbolic characteristics of that. And to me, I just can't find any value outside of that personal, like, that personal
Mm,
experience. I just don't see where it's added. I mean, and I've lived my life centering that for a while, and then I've lived my life this way, and I'm like, this actually gives me a lot more access to a range of, um, of possibilities within my life, and a lot more awareness within myself and within reality and within just the larger context. So yeah, I go back to the same question there. I'm like, what are you really, what are we even talking about? Like,
mhm,
I know what we're talking about, and I know why from an egoic standpoint somebody wants to make that claim. But when you really start looking at the brass tacks of, like, back to the things we were talking about with consciousness, if you just start asking yourself, what do certain propositions afford you, then it starts to become less important, because for me, it's like I look at the death and resurrection as an embodied symbolic way of being, of, dying to these old paradigms and things being resurrected. And that's a growth mindset. That is the logos is a patterning organization of rationality towards
mhm,
something. So I'd say I can see all that. And it's like that matters and makes sense and is alive. But I just don't find much I don't find much living I don't find a living organism in, centering in on that, the
mm.
the belief of, is this true? Like,
Sure.
in time and place in history, like,
Mhm.
uh
Yeah, the pragmatist Pierce, he and then there's some Petersonian stuff going on here as well. One of the things about Jordan Peterson that I think is interesting, one, I think that his political stuff is, his political stuff, and that's just Peterson,
yeah,
but his religious stuff,
whatever.
it's quite interesting. His religious,
Mm,
work is really interesting, because I think that, one, Nietzsche, I made this point with Brittany, Britt Hartley,
yeah,
Peterson is a Nietzschean, and one of the main influences for the pragmatist was Nietzsche, right? She's asking, why not untruth? Why do we value truth at all? And so this whole idea of truth and belief start to change. And so Pierce, I think, identified belief as a habit of action, right? What do you mean when you believe something? And this is something that Peterson does pretty well, too, and he's getting that from the pragmatist movement. If you believe something, are you just proclaiming it to be true, right? Like, are you just like using the words, making the propositions, doing the apologetics, or are you habitually acting in the way that Jesus would have called you to act? Like, how
yeah.
how how much do you believe, right? I think Peterson does that really well. And I think that if we were to go about understanding truth and belief in that way, we would probably have a better world than just throwing propositions at each other and acting like they have value in themselves when I don't believe that they do.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting I mean, that brings me into something else we want to talk about. So why do you think Jesus still has so much power for people today? Like, why do you think this is still such a resonating thing? I mean, I see the I mean, is it forced by the algorithms? Is it something that people know that people are talking about, so they fall into that, or is it something that people are genuinely curious about?
Mhm.
I've seen it pop up. One of the biggest podcasts, The Diary of the CEO, just posted a video on, Wes Huff, which, I've got
Mm.
this, whatever. But uh,
Yeah.
Foley and Pajot were just talking the other day, having this debate. O'Connell, he's having people, and these are very big podcasts. I mean, these are very
Mhm.
popular podcasts, and it seems to be a very reoccurring theme that we're having. Is it just in the Western grammar? Like, what are your thoughts on this? Like, what is it? What is making this salient?
Yeah, there's so much here, right? There's so many components. There's capitalistic point of it. There's a social media point of it. There's a philosophy point of it. There's political. There's so much here. But what I can say is that I think that Jesus is a symbol. Whether Jesus rose from the dead or not, is not what I'm saying. I'm not even saying that that's true or false. What I'm saying is that Jesus functions as a symbol within the Western culture.
I get you.
This
Yeah.
symbol is the ultimate one mystery and two savior, right? Like the symbol of Jesus gives you the context through which you can make sense of everything else, right? And he saves you from the evil in the world. And so there's a lot of safety here too. And so we have this existential factor, we have the symbolic factor, and as shallow as it may seem, like those are huge factors without a doubt. But as shallow as this last point may seem, I think that it's um very prevalent is that people also like to debate, right? And they like truth. They like truth. And one of the biggest truths that people find the most valuable is this Jesus thing. And so you have social media where people are having more conversations than ever. People are being exposed to apologetics more than ever. People are being exposed to religions in a way that we have never seen people be exposed to religions before. That is huge. That's not talked about enough at all. So when Cliff Knechtley came online, started doing his thing, people loved him, right? And he's not even one of the best apologetics, but people are very attracted to his demeanor. Um, Whether Cliff is a good or bad apologist or not, I think that he truly believes that Jesus rose from the grave, and people found him charismatic, interesting, and so it raises the question: what do I believe? People are having these conversations everywhere. What do I believe? And now, due to this capitalistic factor, social media, it gives people more views to bring these professional philosophers and apologists online. Now we're going to have it
Or
publicized
not
for
so
everyone to see,
professional or just
or not
yeah.
so professional. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
but I think there's so much there, but there's a symbol factor, there's a capitalist factor, there's a social media factor, truth factor, um,
Yeah.
but there's not just one thing, right? It's a composition of parts to create this whole, and that is, I think, that whole is what creates the interest and the influence in Christianity that we're seeing today online.
Yeah. Well, and this I got 2 questions with that, but one of them is, do you think well, I've noticed you kinda have a laid back attitude towards this. I mean, a very, like, it doesn't feel very emotionally charged, which is
Mhm.
interesting because I feel like most atheism in the past, or anybody that would claim that label or that
Mhm.
title, or anybody that would speak in the, let's say, the antithetical position towards traditional Christianity, in a debate fashion. It's something I wouldn't do just because I have no personal desire to go into that debate, but I think other people
Sure.
have the energy to do debates, and that's, good on them. But I'm wondering if and this is probably purely speculation because it's like I'm just curious to hear your thoughts, but I feel like, a lot of people, but me included, I mean, not so much in the debate form, but just in like making information or giving information about the factual history of something, just to kind of deconstruct stuff, comes from a place of like being in those places of trauma or religious abuse or spiritual abuse and realizing it was spread through misinformation about um you know the topic. It's like it's a factor that I do think about, and it makes me think, and so I wonder with certain people if that feeling is also motivating some of the conversation for people of like, because Jesus is such a popular topic and because that it is such a powerful symbol, like, that is easily weaponized. I mean, if you look at any authoritarian playbook,
Mm,
they always lean into these symbols and they lean into these cosmologies to create some type of Gnostic, world in which that motivates people. I don't know. I'm wondering how much of that feeling of needing to counterbalance that, do you think plays into it, or do you think that's just, you know, I don't know. Just curious as to your thoughts about that.
yeah, I mean, you're gonna find a lot of people in, like, the deconstruction space that are doing incredible jobs, right? Like, you have Britt Hartley, who's really, she's a professional. She has her master's in theology. She's doing her dissertation now for a PhD in theology, and yeah, I think that's definitely a factor in how often we're hearing these debates come up. How often we're hearing people talk about it is that there also is a religious trauma that comes from it. And if you read Frederick Douglass's his autobiography, he writes, the church, the priests were the most harsh people towards the slaves. So yeah, there's a lot of religious trauma that comes from the church. It comes from the figure of Christ. It comes from you know the Christian ideal, right? And that's not gone. I hope people understand that that's not gone. We also still have we don't have slavery anymore, right? But what we do have is a capitalistic political influence from Christianity, right? And that political influence is doing its best to oppress people. And so there is still that religious trauma that comes up and will be influencing how we discuss and how often we discuss Christianity.
Yeah. Well, and I get the feeling that that doesn't so much, you don't. I get to. I don't know, like your experience with growing up around this stuff and the motivation towards not so much being from trauma, but being just from this pursuit of this philosophical pursuit, and but yet there's still that interest, you're still very interested in
Mhm.
kind of unpacking this stuff. And it's like for you, where do you feel like you're not so much like all the speculation as to with the internet, or like if you were just doing this for yourself, do you feel like this is something that is needed, or do you
Mm.
feel like it's like something that could be let go of in like the perfect, all things being equal, moving out of the lineage of the Western grammar or the Christian grammar that we have, if we were to go into something else, like, you know,
It's a
what would
really
that
good
be?
question. It's a really good question. I don't know how much it's needed. I wouldn't say it's needed because if you look at the Scandinavian countries, they famously are extremely secular, though they do have Christian traditions that they still engage with. A lot of people still get baptized. A lot of people get married in churches and have the priest a part of their wedding. So I don't know how much is needed. I don't think it's going to go anywhere anytime soon. I know that some people have predicted the death of Christianity and the death of religion. There's not a single sociologist that's going to take that seriously, um, at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. In the early 1900s, I don't remember the sociologist, but he basically wrote a book and was like, "Yeah, you guys think you're going secular. You're not, right? And yes, we have the
Yeah.
rise of secularity, but the death of God, the death of religion, it's not gonna come about." So I think what we should be
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
is reinterpreting, how we understand
Mm,
this stuff. And so I'm
yeah.
really interested in constructive theology, which
Yeah.
understands
Yeah.
that we don't take this literally, but what is the value of it to us?
Yeah, which is so funny because man, that's like the church fathers too. Like that's how they viewed it. Like a lot, like Origen and Nissa and all those guys were looking at that balance between the symbolic. Like, okay, yeah, this happened, so we're building this on this, but none of this needs to be read that way. And this is
Mhm,
something that they're playing with. Like they didn't deify Paul. They weren't like everything Paul was writing was from the mouth of God. It was like Paul
mhm.
was a guy wrestling with theology, and now we're wrestling with theology, and now
Yeah.
we're looking at this thing playing out. And with what you're saying, I tend to view that through apocalypse, not in the Left
Mm.
Behind series of being raptured into the sky that our current government is utilizing for bombing Iran.
Yeah.
But in we won't go there. But apocalypse in the I think the original Greek word of unveiling. David Bentley
Mhm,
Hart talks a lot about this, and the Christianity was never doctrinal. It was always apocalyptic. It was always about the unveiling of a thing in space, in time, of a new mode of consciousness and a new way of seeing. It was a dehumanized population within Rome that
yeah,
had no ways of being humanized. It was like there was no access to that. And then now you have a new way of being and participating through agapic love that Paul was talking about, along with his own projections. In my opinion, I think Paul
mhm,
was projecting much of mean, the dude was a murderer. Like he had,
Mhm,
tell me you don't have psychological trauma and damage from that. I have a
mhm,
hard time believing that doesn't affect your psyche. So of course
mhm,
you're going to have things spill out all over that. But the fact that he's talking about a new mode of being and a new way of seeing provided access to a new mode of being, and it was an agapic, humanizing paradigm. So when I think about Jesus, I think about this ongoing uh, apocalypse.
mhm,
So the return of Christ in my mind is like, okay, well, the return of Christ, that is an apocalyptic vision that doesn't have to be based in language, that can be based in something different, that doesn't look like a traditional model of like how our current theologians, or not even theologians, just people that are, writing crazy books, are talking about, what the return of Christ looks like. In my mind, it's like, okay, well, what does that look like as a new thing gets unveiled, as the Christ within us, like this, it's a new mode of consciousness in my mind.
yeah,
I
yeah,
could see that becoming a way of being, which transitions the whole thing into something that I think has to align with modern day science, with reason, with logic, with philosophy. Like it's gotta, it can't, like that was Aquinas's whole thing. Like it wasn't like he was not in lockstep with what was happening in time and place with the current science, with the current
mhm,
philosophy. Like it was powerful because it was connected to that. And I think we've just drifted so far from anything that, and I think that's why these debates happen too, is because people seem to be still debating this idea of man in the sky Jesus within Christianity. And I would love to see more orthodox thought in these types of discussions, because then it takes it out of this debate of silly God in the sky that is something that nobody believes in. Like obviously people believe in it, but
mhm,
like the church fathers wouldn't recognize that. And then, atheists who are getting stuck in this other paradigm of either reductionism or materialism, that's its own form of dogma, and meeting in the middle towards these apocalyptic unveiling of consciousness, and this idea of
mhm,
what does it look like when our Jesus doesn't look like what we're thinking he's going to look like. And I'm also Jungian, so I think evil and the feminine and all of that has been traditionally, is been suppressed within the current model of Christianity, which is why a lot of the issues that are happening. So I also think that has to come back, and that's
mhm.
going to make itself balanced out in some way, shape, or form. But I think consciousness is, what I've noticed is it just keeps coming back to, like, that seems to be the one door that I think opens up, at least on the atheist side, where it's like, hey, like, here's something that can't be answered. I know many Christians that don't even want to think about it because they're just very stuck on, what they have. But I view that as kind of the meeting place. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, like how you view consciousness and the mystery of it all.
Oh, yeah, I mean, there's so much there. I wanna go back to constructive theology, because I
Yeah,
think the conscience plays a huge role in this. Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Just time
Gordon
together.
Kaufman wrote 3 books, God the
Oh
Problem,
yeah. Hmm.
um, The Theological Imagination, and In the Face of Mystery. And his whole idea is that theology has to be holistic. It can't be a singular where, like, we're just pointing at the Bible and saying that is an authority, because when things change, you're going to undermine your own Bible. If the science changes, undermines the Bible, now the Bible is not an authority. So if we take theology and we have it to be an imaginative construct that alters throughout how humans need to solve the problems, and we interpret it through the lens of modern day science and how in our modern problems, we get an approach of theology that is much more interesting and much more useful, right? And the way that he understands God is that God is the symbol, or the symbolic figure that is the ultimate mystery, which orients society towards a higher mode of living, you know? And whatever
Mm,
you call God, like that is God for you. So like in the West, we'd have like Jesus, and in the East, we'd have, Allah, and all these other, Vishnu, Shiva, we have all these other symbols of God that orient, right? And in monotheistic civilizations, we have like the symbol. So it's not just like a bunch of different symbols that like have different parts that play a role in our lives. We have like the symbol that through
right.
which everything else makes sense. And I think that his idea of God is so fascinating in regards to consciousness because what he says is that humans find themselves in a place of finitude, right? We realize that we don't have certainty. We realize that we're going to die. That's something that we're all going to face at some point. Um, and that this symbol, God, functions in the same way that I'm functioning with you consciously. So when I'm talking to you, I can see your eyes, I can see your body moving, I can hear your words, and I can understand them based on our shared usage of that word. There's a part of you that I can never have access to. Right? There's the observer, right? And I have to just imagine that it's there. I can't determine that it's certainly there, but I just have to imagine that it is, and then I can use personal language to have a conversation with you. And he says we do the same thing with God. We have this ultimate mystery that we can have, that we are we have available to us. That there's so much that we don't know. There's so much that we're limited within. And we look at that symbol, right? And we go, there's something that I can that there's the available God, the mystery that's available. But then we then use personal language to talk about what's beyond that symbol, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
like the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
actual God. And what he says is that, like, just
Yeah,
because we use that symbol doesn't mean that God, the personal God, is real, but it's real to us. Like, we
yeah,
use it in a way that, in the same way that I talk to you. That is the most fascinating concept of consciousness with God that I've ever heard. It is
yeah.
so interesting, and I think that it's as probable as anything else. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, yeah, dude. If so, like taking off the governor and just like letting out, like if we're just playing, and again, I think we both established like neither one of us are spitting from a place of like, hey, this is the truth, but
Yeah, no.
just playing.
Yeah.
I'm very impacted by both Neoplatonic thought, but also the Kyoto school of Nishitani, and
Mhm,
and he was very um uh influenced by Heidegger and also Nietzsche, and I think that the ground of being, Tillich as well.
mhm,
Those guys are they've influenced me a lot. And what I really appreciate about Nishitani is his relationship with nihilism and God and all of that is really fascinating because he viewed um, nihilism as a good thing. Inevitably, it was something necessary. It was like a portal to God in a lot of ways, and it was the no thingness, right? So it's like a lot of people uh will see that. They'll see the end of what we have access to, and then beyond it you don't know, so it appears meaningless. It appears like, what can I construct there of any value, of any meaning? And
mhm,
so I look at that as like that's the ground of being, that which all things kind of emanate from. It's the no thingness. And what happens is if you stare at that, it will shrink and depress and it will cripple. Like it will just cause tremendous anxiety, depression, pain. But what he was saying was that the problem isn't that we should try to fill that. The problem is you have to persevere. You can't look away. His problem wasn't that Nietzsche looked into the void, is that he didn't look long enough. That's what he said, which was kind of interesting because um, when you look long enough, what happens is eventually things start to emerge in a different mode of being. Like, well, kind of what you're talking about, where it's these symbols that we're engaging with, that we don't have the full story, but we participate in how they emerge. We engage with the emergence and we allow the thing to be as it is, and I've always been fascinating by that because I think there's two things going on. It's like, one, I think that I'm not a dualist, but there's two gods. Okay. There is the God in which we can construct, in which we orient to. And then there's the ground of being. And like the Tao says, that which can be named is not the Tao. That
mhm.
exists beyond the perspective. That's learned ignorance. That's what Kusa's taught. That's what any mystic will say
Yeah.
is it's beyond. But,
Mhm,
but trying it's tricky. That's slippery because what happens is people will be like, "Yeah, I just named it. I got it." And you're like, "No, you didn't. You didn't.
mhm.
You named something about it. So you still constructed a connecting point to it." And I think
Yeah.
that to me is where we make that slip from relational ontology to substance ontology without realizing that we've fallen into it again. And so for me, the way I kind of approach that is just to be honest with it and to say, I hope the things that are orienting me towards that ground of being are beauty, because it's going to be something. I don't know if I'll call it God. You could call it God. I think most people today are worshiping some kind of archetypal structure or form in which is like an emanation from the ground of being that has nothing to do with like the actual ground of being. And it's just some type of pattern that exists in the world that a lot of people call it Jesus. I think a lot of the church, what they're worshiping has nothing to do with Jesus. And I don't know
Sure.
what that structure is. So I think a lot of these forms will do that.
Mhm.
What like in my mind, what I hope for is whatever the structure that I've chosen to orient myself, be it Shiva, be it Allah, be it Jesus, be it whatever, has the characteristics or has the framing that allows me access into seeing most honestly and authentically the ground of being without having too many propositional like like without being gripped by complexes. And I don't know if
Yeah,
that makes sense. I don't know. I
it
said a lot, but
does.
that's just kind of like stuff that I chew on and think about. And obviously it's always unfolding. It's always
Mhm. Yeah.
new
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah, yeah.
it's like you learn as you go.
100% makes sense, and I think this is what Gordon Kaufman's also getting at. It's like you have the available God, which we, like, use symbols, we use the word Jesus and Allah and all these things. Then there's the ultimate mystery, which we should never be we can't access, right? If you name it, it's not that. And this is one of the problems I have with apophatic theology as well, is that when you say God is not finite, you're ultimately saying God is eternal, and now you're saying something about God. Um,
Mm.
and so what I've been interested in recently, like I said before, is like just getting rid of like relying on the language of it and kind of just experiencing. And so
Yes,
if
yes,
I
yes, yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
if I'm just like in the world experiencing and I like find the beauty within and I really feel connected. And I'm an atheist and like I said before, I don't really like the word doesn't really make sense for me. Uh, It, I'm more agnostic even like that word doesn't make sense to me. But I enjoy being in the world experiencing without having to like put truth value and like describe stuff and like have to like go, oh well, God is X, God is Y. Like I think that's idolatry in a lot of ways. If we can't name
yeah,
God and we start doing that. So I'm so interested in just kind of experiencing my way through the world and um
yeah,
finding what's good and what and and what's not. It doesn't mean that there's like some fundamental principle that like is goodness, like God is goodness. I don't know. I have no idea. Um, but I do live as if good exists. I do live as if beauty exists, and for me, that's enough. All the philosophers who are going to watch this are going to go, that's a cop out. Fair enough. Fair
yeah,
enough.
yeah.
I personally don't have an issue with that at all. But what are your thoughts?
I just wonder how many philosophers are still. I mean, I frame a lot through egoic. Like I said, I'm a transpersonal psychologist, and so for me, I look at the complex. I look at the egoic state of the intellect, not in how the Neoplatonics would think about intellect, but how we would think about just the logic in the way. And I even think logic and rationale is misused. I don't think people use rationale the right way.
Mhm,
But I think a lot of the what you would say the philosophers of today, to me, I always frame this as being in the driver's seat where the ego is still viewing itself as the master of the house, meaning like the thing that which we call ourselves is believing that we can obtain that absolute, believing
mhm,
that we understand. And so for me, going back to consciousness, going back to and this is not even like I don't even think this is controversial because it's not like the unconscious material. Like this has been like this has been made evident. Like we've had plenty of studies and plenty of psychologists that have talked about the unconscious material that arises and what causes actions and how we know that it doesn't just center on our conscious decisions, and there's and consciousness becomes a hard word here because there's two types of forms where it's like the ego, which is like conscious, like
mhm.
how you and I are talking to each other versus like the bigger conversation around consciousness. So for me, I just frame it as like these philosophers are having these conversations in a lot of ways very much stuck in that egoic mode of being, where it's like the more interesting part is when we allow ourselves to participate with the entirety of the psyche through
Mhm,
whatever mode like, whatever method you want to take there. I mean, there's plenty of ways. I work with altered states. I work with trance. I work with hypnagogic states. I think IFS therapy is showing us a lot of stuff right now. You look at Fritz Perls, Gestalt therapy, Jungian Dreamwork. Like, you can go into all of these modes that are not, um, they're not unmoored. I mean, there's enough, in my opinion, to show like, hey, gnosis and the stuff that we're discovering through this is every bit worth your time and worth the exploration as any type of philosophical pursuit. I would just argue that modern day philosophy for a lot of people is way more intellectualized, and it's an egoic form, because like in the comments, like, people are becoming more concerned with proving their point correct
mhm,
as opposed to taking a thought and sitting with it and chewing on it and going out and exploring consciousness.
mhm,
And to me, that just says you're not interested in the experience of living. You're interested in trying to uh, amplify your identity marker towards whatever it is you've found to be truth,
mhm,
which is that's fine. I'm not no judgment towards it. I want to go experience the beautiful. Like, going back to what you're saying, it's like, yeah, you're right. Like, trying to pin this down is going to be really hard, but trying to experience it is not that hard to say, like, what do I find good? Like,
mhm.
what do I find beautiful? Like,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
is true in my life right now? Like, what is
Mhm.
true that's actually part of like my truth? That's actually not as hard.
Yep.
But yeah, I just laugh when I see these conversations, because I'm like, what's are you listening to your dreams? Like, the people that are making these statements, it's like, but I get it. It's hard. I don't want to sound judgmental, and I really want to be careful with that, because I get that some people are not making a. It's not like they're making a conscious choice to be a certain way. I think a lot of times our fears, our anxieties, the way we stabilize ourselves and orient ourselves depends on that type of certainty. Uh,
Mhm.
for a lot of people, even if they don't realize it does. So I want to be respectful of that. I don't want to sound dismissive of it.
No, I mean, I totally agree, though. I mean, one of my issues with philosophy, like I said, like I study. This is what I do. Like I study philosophy in academia. I'm going heading into my master's for it. I love philosophy, but there's a point at which, like after Kant, I still don't understand why we're still even trying to discover like what's true about how the world exists in itself. Like we kind of acknowledge that we can't do that, right? And yet we're still trying to say what I know is correct. Well, how do you know that? Well, because like I thought about it. I have all this evidence, and I've rationalized it. Cool. We're still depending on our senses, which can't evaluate the world as it exists in itself. It's one of the things that I think philosophers get wrong about science too, and materialism is that they believe that like materialism and science are the same thing, right? And like they're not. Let's get that clear. Materialism and science are not the same thing. Science evaluates the natural world, but it doesn't really conclude that all that exists is material. Materialism goes on to say all that exists is material, then uses science as the method to do that.
Yeah.
But science does not make that conclusion, right? All
Yeah.
science does is evaluate the material world, and so philosophers now like use materialism as if it's some certified truth, and then go, oh well, all like your religious beliefs, like you know, uh, they're false. But like we haven't proved that. We actually don't really have much evidence to support that a God does not exist. Now we do have evidence to say that like X doesn't exist, right? Like this historical narrative about X is not true. We can say that about a lot of stuff. I'd even say that a lot of biblical scholarship would say that Paul isn't even actually a murderer. That that's also made up, right? There's
Hmm.
so much
Yeah, yeah,
history
yeah.
here in this stuff that is so fascinating, and we can evaluate them. But then if you say like, oh, we looked at all this like historical evidence, therefore God doesn't exist. It's like, well, that doesn't follow from the premises at all, right? So, I mean, like I said before, that's what I'm really trying to do is to lay the groundwork to have honest conversations. And where I go with it, and I'm not saying that everyone should go with this, is that, like I'm so interested in experience. and
Yeah.
dropping propositional truth value. Not to say that like truth doesn't have any value, but like there are some things that perhaps it's not, and that experience is more valuable. And I think personally that God is one of those things that if you're going to have an experience with God, whatever that may be, the experience is much more valuable than the propositional claims you make about that God.
Yeah. Well, I think about Emerson and the Oversoul and this idea of the like it just really it kind of hits back into that point where it's like, you're grabbing on to that which is phenomenologically relevant, you know? It's
Mhm,
like that which is in front of you, and I think we can miss what's in front of us in our pursuits of truth or beliefs or whatever it is external. I mean, that's a lot of those stuff that I look at where I'm like, um, I think a lot of our issues come from this external, externalizing and projecting where it's like all the world that exists within here. That's not just solely in here, but it's like this mirror image becoming just so externalized where everything is out there to be found. And you're right, I think that's a great example, but I've always joked just like I always feel like Young, because Young was very Kantian. I mean, his all of his stuff. If you look at like where his base came from, it was like he was Kant through and through. But I always think of it as like where Kant showed us the limit of the doors, like like where the limit of the rationale is. Young walked through it through consciousness, and he went
mhm,
into that realm, not with truth, but with just experience, and
mhm,
dreams and imagination and all this stuff. And so, what's really cool is like, when you start opening up to those experiences and you don't have the need to be like um you know uh identified with them, identified with whatever it is, then I think it just allows for more flexibility in to experiencing. I think Dreamwork is I do a lot of work with people with a lot of clients with Dreamwork, and that's been I think a really when it's understood symbolically, it's a powerful tool
mm,
um, that I think our culture is missing. Which I want to ask you about. My just to get your thoughts on this. I think a lot of our issues is that we have become symbolically illiterate within our culture. So I think all of these these frameworks that we look at, looking for this Cartesian, like this empirical, like things that we can look at as facts, or even the modes of philosophy, uh, have lost a lot of like. We don't talk about symbolism a lot. I don't hear that come up in the conversations about um, philosophy. We don't hear enough, like at least not properly understood. I think we look at like a lot of these conversations, and it gets dismissed, or even the imaginal. I do work with the imaginal, and John Vervaeke's got great work on just the cognitive science behind what the imaginal is. It's like we think of it as made up fantasy, but it's like, well, no, like think about anything you're going to do. What do you first do? Well, you plan it out. You imagine what that's going to be before you act. Like, where is that in your mind? Like, where is your planning? Like, show me where it's at. It's like, we don't know, but, like, is it not real? It's like, no, it's real, like, I'm thinking of it, but it's not. So it exists in this space that we don't, uh it's like it's just something that is I would like to, I think we need to be talking about this more because I think it gives us access into more of what we're talking about when it comes to experiences,
mhm.
instead of that flattened, um, materialistic, reductionist way that shows us like, I don't know, it's almost like 2D world to me.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I'm so interested in what's called world making. Like Nelson Goodman has a book. I think it's called Ways of World Making. It's on my bookshelf somewhere. Um, and his whole idea is that, and I'm gonna pull Kaufman in here as well, is that like we imagine the world and that we use symbols to construct what we have already imagined within our minds, and we create these metaphysical frameworks off the imaginative construct, which we then go ahead and symbolize. Um, and societies do that differently. And so I would agree that we have become, I don't know if we'd have to guess hash out what it means to be symbolically illiterate so I can like really know what you mean by that. But I would say
Mm,
that people don't acknowledge that what they identify as fact is actually culturally, spatiotemporally, historically, um, contingent entirely. Like you wouldn't think these things if you were not from where you are from, raised the way you are, in the culture that you are. You would have a different framework, and because language creates truth, and truth comes from the framework, what you're identifying within the world, you're going to have different truth as well. And so, if we're talking about that and being symbolically illiterate in that way, in that understanding that all of our symbols are contingent, I would 100% agree.
Yeah, I think myth and image too. Like I think those like um maybe illiterate's not the right word. I'm looking for a good word. I don't know what I don't really I've been thinking about this because uh specifically within dreams, I think people view dreams in a very complicated relationship. Like most people have a very complicated relationship with dreams, if any relationship, or
Mhm,
misunderstood relationships to what dreams could provide. It's causing many people to dismiss or just to ignore or overlook, viewing them as some like maybe byproduct of residue of the day, right? You know, it's
mhm,
like just the brain kind of doing brain stuff at night.
mhm,
Which is to me, I think there's a lot of material that has proved very useful, very enlightening, very affording from engaging symbolically with dream figures as different parts of myself, different ways that I'm engaging, even with like Ian McGilchrist's work with the right and left hemispheres of the brain, which not going to get into like the data or like it's debated for sure, whatever. But I think point being this mindset of how the brain processes imagery and how the unconscious holds on to the prima materia, like how uh, we are like what you're saying, products of environment. There's a multiplicity of mind that's taking place within consciousness. And I
mhm,
think all of those things factor in that I don't think we have access to those purely propositionally or just through language, just like graphing type mindset. So I think that symbolic imagery offers us access into um, you know, modes of being, modes of awareness
mhm,
that the dreams I think speak through us in that language. And so I've noticed with a lot of the work that I do with clients, even just being able to orchestrate themselves and find that compensatory function in which they are able to like, have this more integrated sense of being has come through being able to listen and understand what's going on within themselves. But I think
mhm,
that requires a symbolic, like, I think if you try to do that purely logically, uh, you're going to always have that's always like going to stay within the ego. So when I say symbolically, I think like maybe that's like just that limiting factor of just
mhm,
not understanding the depth of what a symbol actually even means and what it means to say or what a myth means. I think we have a fraught relationship with all of those terms in a Western mind, and I think I
mhm,
put that in that category of the unveiling of Jesus. Like that is part
mhm.
of it, the unveiling of all of this mythic imagination of consciousness that I just yeah, I mean, I personally think propositionally believe that it's gonna happen. Like that's part of what needs to happen in order for us to stop projecting unconscious material at each other in these ways. But be curious to hear, if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about Dreamwork. It's not something that I've really explored myself. I'm definitely not the person who's going to write it off as if it's nothing. Like, it's certainly not what I would do. I think it's super interesting to know that our brains are just kind of functioning without our um, intentional, with I guess without intentionality, attached to it from us. We're kind of just observing it while we're sleeping beyond our control. Like
Yeah.
that's fascinating. I
Mm.
don't know how symbols function in dreams, but I would certainly say that me when I was a kid, my grandmother, like I said, was a regression therapist, and she would do like dream stuff. She'd be like every morning, what did you dream about? And we would tell her. She'd give us like a theory, like what she thought was going on. Um, but I think it's interesting that like I do agree that people at least don't acknowledge the power of symbols in our myth and our dreams. I would say that like myth or dreams certainly are not taken to be like as, or I guess aren't thought of as much in our culture, but like myth and fable are, and especially like religions that some people would identify as a myth, some people not. But religions function in the same way, that we have like these symbolic figures which identify something specifically and are interpreted through a cultural lens and through a temporal lens too. You know, like how we see Jesus today is not how the fathers saw Jesus back
Mm,
then.
yeah.
It's not how Aquinas saw Jesus back then. We are always interpreting symbols, specifically religious symbols, through a through an interpretive lens, and we can never get rid of that. So I would say, um, as I was saying before, is to kind of just acknowledge our contingency and recognize that, like, um, truth too is contingent upon our languages, which have adopted and changed over time. And so when we look at the myth, when we look at the symbols, we look at the religions, we look at our own experience, perhaps we should be trying to play with our imagination a little bit more than trying to rationalize everything.
Yeah.
Certainly, I would agree.
Cool. Man, Austin, dude, you're sorry, I think I heard in the last interview, you're 23 years old?
23.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. Bro, I was not having these conversations when I was 23. Just gonna
I,
say
I mean, I got
that.
lucky. I grew up with, I was raised by my grandma when I was like 12 years old, and she's just some weirdo spiritual hippie, and I, and I
Sounds like
thought it was
me,
so,
man. Maybe
I thought it was so strange back then, but now I look back, it's like, oh, like my whole personality, my interest in philosophy, myth, like it all comes from having these conversations when I was like 12, 13 years old. I just never grew out of them. It's in a way, it's like I'm still like a kid in like this imaginative way, which I find to be fun. I appreciate that I was raised in the way that I was, so that I can be having the conversations that I'm having now.
Yeah, dude, it's impressive and man, it's a blessing, It's like a really cool thing because I look at a lot of the people engaged today. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's just so many different uh paths that people end up taking that
Mm,
we're all on different paths, and I think there's who knows why we're on the path that we're on. But I will say, it's like making the most of that and using that and doing the stuff you're doing with it is really cool. I mean, that's
appreciate it,
it's
man.
a blessing to a lot of people, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, man. I'm excited to stay in touch with you. Hopefully, we'll have some more conversations in the future. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I think this is it's always fun to meet curious souls, man. That's
Mhm.
just that's what my whole podcast is about. It's just soul notes. Just it's like exploring these crevices and these areas, and in a way that I think is hopefully sets the tone for a new way of doing it, and more engaging way where it's not confrontational in the sense of like what we're saying this whole episode is just
Yeah.
more dialogical. I mean,
Mhm.
I think it really should be. And I really enjoyed, the conver so I first started the conversation you were having with Britt, and, I followed some of her work because she was on with John, and I, like, have a really close relationship with John. He's just like, or, like, mentor type figure to me, where I really appreciate his work. And then I saw some of her shorts and I was like, okay, you get the information, but I feel like in these videos, like the longer form, you get to like see the relational side, and I
Mhm.
think that is really part of any ideas. Like when I read philosophy, I'm I'm very Cornell West in this. It's like, yeah,
Mm.
cool. What's their ideas? Amazing. But like who shaped them? Like where did Foucault grow up? Like
Yeah.
what was he doing? Like who was he in relationship with? Like
Mhm.
what was the quality of the like of who was so that stuff is so important, and I think we forget that. So it's like these type of opportunities I look at as just a really cool way of humanizing. And hopefully we can model that, having these discussion, not that we disagreed on a ton of stuff, but, having even harder arguments or harder discussions in that
Mhm.
relational way, I think is just so much more life giving,
Yeah.
so much more fruitful. Like we'll get somewhere with it, we can
Yeah,
build
no, I
on it.
totally agree. And like this conversation has been so fun. I have yet to this is the first time I've actually been able to kind of explore my own um concepts of like symbols and pragmatism a little bit more. So I haven't been able to really hash that out. So this is my first time actually discussing it publicly. people I assume are gonna hate it. That's typically how people, uh, uh, in the West, kinda take my approach. But, I enjoy having the conversations. They're always so much fun. And if we can have, more conversations that are just honest and, rather than, coming at them with our swords up, just to try to acknowledge the experience of the other individual and what it means to them and the symbols that they use to construct the world. I think we would get a
Yeah.
much more fruitful and much more beneficial uh, society, and especially if we try to value the human being, the sentient beings. I would also include animals in this as well. um,
Yeah.
Rather than truth and value, our society would be so much better.
Yeah, I mean, and the last thing I want to say with that is this, and this is just how I live because it's like I think it changed my perspective so much in life is when you stop looking at people as some is like somebody you have to either defend your truth against or to be in a debate or to make sure you don't get bested by or whatever, and just start viewing every conversation as an opportunity of like there's something there that this person might have. They could be someone that you have no intellectual respect for, somebody that you don't look at as like a smart person. It could be anybody, but at the end of the day, if you're open to receiving information from the world around you, there's always information to be found. There's always things that
Mhm,
you can learn about yourself through the way that you respond or react. And I think like that shift for me has changed so much because I forget the exact numbers on this, but there's studies on opponent processing where it's like a person will try to solve a problem and maybe their percentage of solving is at like 58% or whatever, or maybe even lower. It's like 40 something, and then you put them in a group of people where other people are looking at it, and it goes up to like 87% or whatever. So our ability to see our own blind spots are not is like we are not good at that.
mhm.
We're not going to see the areas that we're missing. But when we are in community of conversations like this, where I'm actually listening to you, you're actually listening to me, we're actually interested in the conversation, and we walk away with something that we're like, I haven't thought about this. That's I think the like just that's that what the midwifery going back. We'll go full circle back to the Socratization of
Mhm.
things. Like that's what we're getting at. It's like what are we actually missing here? So, that's, yeah, I'll wrap it up with that, man. Any last words you want to leave or anything else
Yeah,
that
yeah. I mean,
you
if I
got on
were
your
to leave
heart?
anyone with anything, it would be, like I said before, value the human being, not reason or the truth. Human beings should always come first. And if I were to kind of promote anything from my philosophy and what I've studied over my time in academia, it would be basically that, which is in a way kind of anti-philosophy, kind of evading philosophy,
Hmm.
the evading the value of truth. Yeah, that's what I would say. Value the human being, not reason or truth at all times.
Dude, I love it. Austin, I'll post some links to your stuff below. Check him out. He's got post videos frequently. You got your own YouTube channel. You got guests coming on, some pretty cool guests that is worth checking out. So anybody, go give his page a look for. And then till next time, man. We'll do it again.
Yeah, it was fun, man.
Hey guys, before you go, if I could ask you one quick favor. If you enjoyed this video and you got something from it, I would sincerely appreciate it if you would like and maybe subscribe to the channel. Every bit of engagement helps. And in the meantime, if you're curious to check out more content like this, maybe check out this video or that video. Yeah, that's a good one. And don't forget to subscribe.